All right, welcome back in Live Now. I'm Austin Westfall. This is an interesting one. President Zelensky putting this out, saying, the future is already on the front line, and Ukraine is building it. These are our ground robotic systems. For the first time in the history of this war, an enemy position was taken exclusively by unmanned platforms, ground systems, and drones. The occupiers surrendered, and the operation was carried out without infantry and without losses on our side. Here's a closer look at the images that Zelensky sent out. He names a few of the robots. They all have individual names, and he says their ground robotic systems have already carried out more than 22,000 missions on the front in just 3 months. Zelensky says there were about lives were saved more than 22,000 times, he says, when a robot went into the most dangerous areas instead of a person. This is about high technology protecting the highest value, human life, Zelensky says. Okay, so you're looking at him on your screen. Hal and I were talking about this offline, and Hal, you brought this up to me and said, this is really interesting. This is something worth, talking about, because this is something very novel, especially as Zelensky says, this is the first time we've seen these types of robots used in this war. So I'll put these pictures back up on the screen, and if you can, tell us what we're looking at.
Well, what you're looking at is they call it a UGV, unmanned ground vehicle. UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles on the water, USVs, unmanned surface vessels. But this is a vehicle. It looks kind of like a robotic tank if you want to look at it. It's got tracks and stuff. Depending on what they have on it, can have a variety of armaments to include 50 caliber machine guns. It can have anything. You can put rocket propelled grenades on it, all sorts of different things. These things initially were being used as a way to go out there and mark and breach minefields in this war. Not the first time that robots have been used for dealing with demolitions. Police departments will typically use robots, have been for many, many years, to go in and look at improvised explosive devices or anything else that they want to render safe, or just to figure out what it is and then blow it in place. This is taking it to the next step. These things were going out there doing offensive combat, firing on infantry positions, and for the first time, April 2026, for the first time, an all robotic, all, if you want to say all drone, ground drones and aerial drones mix have gone in and taken a substantial enemy position. And there was actually pictures that were out there that showed Russians surrendering to these robots that you're looking at here. That's pretty significant. And for Ukraine, it's very significant because there's a lot more Russian troops than there are Ukrainian troops. And so if they can develop technology like this to go in and do this, it could change the nature of warfare. So the Ukrainians are talking about this pretty strongly. I will tell you that a lot of us who follow military innovation, battlefield innovation across the board are looking at this as kind of a seminal point in history, that a robotic force actually displaced a human force, if you will, on the battlefield. Not the first time that drones and robots have been used, but it was the first time we ever saw something quite like this. Kind of like the first big tank attack that took place in World War I. This one is it's a historic footnote that this took place, and it looks like the Ukrainians are going to go full bore and try and reinforce this methodology across the board. And the Russians haven't really come up with a good, countermeasure or countermeasures to stop this from happening. In fact, what it looked like was the Russian troops were completely overwhelmed and scared to death.
And that was going to be my next question, is what exactly does that look like on the battlefield? Why would human soldiers feel the need to surrender to these robots? What are the robots doing on the battlefield that makes them overcome the Russian forces?
Well, what they're doing is they're rolling through, and in this configuration, the Russians have not been able to take them out. I mean, obviously, you look at it and you say, well, could they take it out with an anti-tank missile or something? I'm sure they've tried to take it out, and I'm sure they're very susceptible to anti-tank missiles as well. But there's only so many anti-tank missiles available on the battlefield, and if you have sheer numbers, you can push these things through. You're not losing troops by doing this, and that's something that the Ukrainians are very careful about, is not wasting their manpower. That's something the Russians don't seem to care about at all. They'll waste manpower at the drop of a hat, which is another way of saying getting Russians killed. And they go up there, they get right up on their lines, and at that point, the Russian troops have two choices: surrender or die. And the Russian troops apparently are picking surrender more and more, and these things are very, very effective. Also, they're able to fire things. A 50 caliber machine gun. I may know a thing or two about 50 caliber machine guns, and I don't care what movie you may have seen. No, you don't pick those things up and go running into battle with a 50 caliber. It's a it's a lot of heavy ammo. It's a very heavy weapon. It's just not something that is easily man portable. We have a team that goes in with 50 cals, and normally we mount them on vehicles because they're so heavy. This thing, they can put them on there, and a 50 caliber round has tremendous, penetrating force. It can chew up light vehicles without a lot of heavy armor, but it also could do a tremendous damage on a position where they're dug in. Those 50 caliber rounds going into a earthen berm can at many times just go right through it and cause absolute mayhem. And I'm sure that's what happened. They got inside the so we like to say they got inside the OODA loop of the Russians, the observe, orient, decision, action loop. They were moving faster, quicker, and the Russians couldn't keep up. And all of a sudden, the unmanned ground vehicles were on top of them, and they surrendered. And I think we're going to see more of this.
It's been a while since you and I have done a Russia-Ukraine update, Hal. The Iran war has been dominating the coverage in recent weeks. What's the story on the battlefield as of late? Obviously, we spent a good portion of the back half of last year previewing what was expected to be a cold few months worth of battling, and now we're moving into, it's getting a little bit warmer. So what's the story to tell? And I guess if I could ask you, what are the main points that are worth discussing about the trajectory of the Russia-Ukraine war as it stands in April?
Well, one of the big things is what's not happening. The Russians, through a tremendous amount of manpower and equipment and everything else at the front line, and they were planning this big spring offensive. They were planning, actually, it was even going to precede spring, to gain a lot of territory very quickly and to push back the Ukrainians, and to basically solidify this narrative that the Russians keep putting out, that it's just a matter of time, that there's no way the Ukrainians can prevail. The Russians will eventually win. They just have too many men, too much equipment, too much everything. There's no way the Ukrainians can do that. What has happened is that nothing happened. They made very marginal gains, and in many places, they've lost a significant amount of territory to the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are actually on the offensive. This thing with the robots being an example of a very innovative thing that they're going to replicate and probably gain more ground more quickly in that regard. And the Russians are having huge problems with recruiting. Even with this big bonus system, they're not getting enough troops. They're having major problems with fuel, with building armaments. Now they've got a drone problem. They can't get Shahed drones out of Iran anymore. So they have got some horrendous problems that they may or may not be able to overcome. The other thing is, you're starting to see a lot of discussion at NATO and other major military officials and military leaders around the world basically saying that it's inevitable that Ukraine is going to dominate in this war, that they don't see any way the Russians can possibly win. That is a real shift. That is a big shift. And that's all happened while we've been completely focused on what's going on over in the Middle East with Iran and elsewhere. That's been happening, and it is a huge shift. And the Ukrainians are making great strides, particularly in the areas of drones, as you saw with this unmanned ground system, but also with first-person view drones and long-range drones. And the other thing the Ukrainians are doing, they're taking out deep strikes Russian oil. Remember, we dropped the sanctions on Russian oil to get Russian oil out there to depress the prices of oil? Well, the Ukrainians responded by taking out these oil infrastructure sites, like up around the Baltic, in the Baltic area near St. Petersburg. and basically stopping the Russians from being able to physically export oil. And they've been doing that all over. They even did a strike in the Mediterranean against a ship that's part of the dark tanker fleet. So a lot going on.
Hal Kempfer hosts the Strat podcast. What's coming up on Strat, Hal?
Well, we're going to talk about what's going on. Obviously, I was going to talk a little bit about the robotic thing, but I'm also with the Ukraine-Russia war. But I'm going to talk about what this means, what has just happened here with the Strait, and you may know I do webinars and stuff, and I got one coming up where we're going to talk about maritime choke points. But I'm going to discuss this and also talk about what's happening with the Bab el-Mandeb Strait and the Houthis and what that could portend.
Important stuff. Good to see you, Hal. Have a good rest of your weekend.
All right, you too, Austin.